Christine Schneider, the Visceral Voice.
Welcome to the Visceral Voice podcast. I'm your host, Christine Schneider. Every 2 weeks on this podcast, I talk with voice specialists, manual therapists, health specialists, psychotherapists, movement practitioners, and professional voice users about voice science, function, medication, movement, puberty and aging, and everything in between. I am on a quest, not only to become a better manual therapist, but also to learn everything I can about the living, breathing body and its intricate connection to the voice. This podcast documents the continuation of my learning and my experience as a professional singer, a nutritional consultant, and a manual therapist. Join me every 2 weeks as we strive to provide current, knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate information to help restore, regain, and create happiness and success in your vocal journey. Hello, everyone. If you haven't already filled out the questionnaire, please do so. This really gives me ideas of what direction to take the podcast in, and I really appreciate your ideas. So thank you for filling out the questionnaire for those who have, and thank you for those who are going to. If you enjoy this podcast and you would like to become a supporter, for a donation of $5 a month, you not only get my complete gratitude, but you also get to send in your questions for my guests. You can find a link for Patreon in my show notes. Thank you so much for considering becoming a supporter of the Visceral Voice podcast. I am very grateful for your consideration. I hope that you continue to enjoy the episodes. Please give me your feedback, and I look forward to hearing from you. Lisa Love has an Advanced Master of Education in Motor Learning from the Department of Movement Sciences and Education, Teachers College, Columbia University. She did additional graduate studies in biomechanics and clinical kinesiology at New York University and has a Bachelor of Science in Biology. She is a registered movement therapist through the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. Ms. Love has been teaching in New York City for 30 years, maintaining a private practice in kinesthetic anatomy, motor learning, and neuromuscular re-education, applying an exercise protocol based on the teachings of Joseph Pilates. Lisa has taught teacher training workshops and seminars in appropriate protocols in Pilates for persons with multiple sclerosis, stabilizing the sacroiliac joint, and kinesthetic anatomy. She is a member of IDEA, Physical Mind Institute, ISMETA, and the Multiple Sclerosis Society. She received a Teachers College General Scholarship Award, Teachers College Professional Development and Incentive Award, and is a member of Teachers College International Honor Society in Education. Lisa is an extraordinary movement therapist. I have worked with her myself, and I am beyond thrilled that she is with me today to do this interview. Here you are, my conversation with Lisa Love. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Christine. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, I am so excited and honored to have you here. You are a master of movement, a true master of movement. You helped bring me back 2 years ago from a very bad head and neck injury, and there is no one that I trust more when it comes to movement than you. So I'm really thrilled to have you here on the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure, and thanks so much for saying that.
So you have an Advanced Master's of Education in Motor Learning, and you did additional graduate studies in biomechanics and clinical kinesiology. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming a motor learning specialist and developing your expertise in biomechanics and kinesiology?
Sure. So I actually did it the other way around. I first started my postgraduate studies at NYU in clinical kinesiology and anatomy, and from there I wanted more neuromotor science, and they didn't really have that program at NYU. So I went up to Teachers College at Columbia, where they had a fantastic program in motor learning and movement science. So it was just what I was looking for. It was perfect. It was a relatively new theory in motor learning, and the woman who ran the program was Ann Gentile, Dr. Ann Gentile, and she was brilliant and really one of the pioneers in motor learning theory and practice. Mm-hmm. So I had started in biology. I had undergraduate. I went to school in biology, and I was always a dancer. I danced since I was about 10. As a dancer, I always studied anatomy. I studied ideokinesiology and the Alexander technique, just about anything I could get my hands or mind around. I'd always been very interested in neuromotor or changing patterns. So this was right up my alley.
Great. So we are here today to talk about assisting with rehabilitation through motor learning and retraining of biomechanics and kinesiology for a professional voice user. So when a performer walks into your studio, which many of them do, what might be the first steps that you take to work with them through a repetitive movement injury?
Okay, so yes, many of them do, and I really work from a motor learning vantage point in that I try to develop their skills and awareness to create a partnership more than anything else. So first I observe, I talk to them, I ask them what their goals are, if there's a specific place in the choreography or in the performance where they're feeling pain or they're having trouble with a movement while singing. And we talk about that, and then I start to assess their posture, where some weakness might come into play, why they're having trouble with that particular movement or sequence of movements. And so we start working together to develop a strategy where they can use forces more efficiently, and they may need to strengthen certain muscle groups. They may need to use gravity. They may need to use the floor more. So we start working with strategies that can make it more efficient, because motor learning is all about the brain functioning from a goal-oriented place. So you have a goal, you develop a motor plan based on what that goal is. And a lot of it has to do with internal models of how you get there, and then forces acting on the body and your motivation to get something done.
Mm-hmm. And so in relationship to gravity, as you mentioned that there are always forces present, how might you assist with creating strength or to help balance these forces and or use specific forces for support?
Mm-hmm. So say someone comes in and they have to, let's just do an example. Someone has to lift someone over their head while singing. Mm-hmm. They always 8 shows a week, lifting with the right arm, supporting with the left over and over again. So there are particular muscle synergies that might work together to make that movement easier. They can use the floor more to use gravity, to use their feet and their glutes to support from underneath so that they can get lift from underneath, so that they don't flex their spine or side bend, which can then affect their voice, lose that play to be able to lift and lower, depending on where their neck and their upper spine is. So we work on different muscle synergies to both stabilize the spine and allow some degree of freedom with their shoulder girdle. And that's just a matter of assessment and seeing where they might be weak and where they might not be using some strength that they do have. Also, another interesting thing that I just wanted to bring up is often what we do, if someone has a movement that they repeat all the time on stage, then I'll have them come off stage and do the opposite movement. So while they're off stage, they do a different kind of length tension use of a particular muscle, or they do the opposite side in the same movement.
Yeah.
So we try to keep a balance around the spine and keep some structural integrity around the spine.
Yeah, that is so important. And so you mentioned muscle synergies. For those of the listeners who might not know what muscle synergy is, can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so in muscle synergies, these are muscle groups that work together to perform an action more efficiently. So for instance, if I'm using my arm, my lat and my infraspinatus may be working together, or my lat and my tricep. Mm-hmm. You combine the movements, my serratus and my pec can work together. to keep the rotation and the movement of the scapula more efficient, and also not change the movement or the placement of my neck. So if I'm using certain muscle groups together, that can allow my spine to maintain more balance often.
Yeah, great. And so when we're talking about muscles, for the listeners, when we're talking about movement, we might mention agonist, antagonist, and synergistic. So Lisa's describing that muscle synergy. Can you talk to us about what support for the voice should look like in order to help create optimal vocal function?
When I talk about support for the voice, I'm really talking about support from the ground up to support the position of the head, neck, and thorax so that you can keep as much volume and space in the cavities of the body and not compress or change the spine in a way to decrease the volume, so that you have freedom, your diaphragm has freedom, your abdominals are working efficiently and not against the diaphragm, and you get as much support for freedom of movement and use of the structures involved in vocalizing.
Yeah, I think something that was so incredibly helpful for me that I wish that I had known when I was younger is the activation of the transversus, that transverse abdominis.
Very, very important, because the transverse abdominis, which runs like a sort of like a cummerbund, gives support and interdigitates with the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, they can work, like we were talking before, synergistically. They can work together to sort of slow down the exhalation, sort of a more forced exhalation rather than just a quiet exhalation. If you're singing and you need to control volume, or you need to control how much air pressure is moving through the vocal structures, then you can use the transversus and the diaphragm almost antagonistically, where the transversus and the abdominals, the internal obliques, are slowly contracting to lift the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is pushing back against that a little bit, so that you don't just have this elastic recoil of the diaphragm and the lungs. And that way you have a little bit more graded control.
Yeah. To the listeners, the other podcast with Gail Wetzler on the pressure system of breathing, we definitely go into all of this with breathing. And so part of what Lisa's describing right now is that there is, in normal quiet breathing, there is that natural recoil of the lungs. And so in order to do something like singing, which isn't necessarily natural to our bodies, we need to have this sort of support with the system of that transverse abdominis, internal obliques, with the synergistically with the diaphragm.
That's right. Absolutely. And then, so you're not creating tension that's just going to push the diaphragm up. You're actually working together with the diaphragm. And you get better and better at sort of segmental control to increase the volume, decrease the volume, and keep the tension out of your neck, which, as we all know, is not great for singers.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful in training to strengthen the abdominals with singers, especially with singers, because you don't want to do a lot of spinal flexion using the rectus abdominis, the long abdominal.
Yes.
Because when you do that, you decrease the volume in the cavity. So you want to keep that volume open and have more mobility. So flexing the spine and strengthening it using the rectus abdominis as it's structurally designed, which is to flex the spine, is not great for singers. That's a very important point.
It is. And I'm so glad that you said that. What happens is I see a lot of people come in and there's a tension and a constriction at the top of the rectus abdominis there, which causes a constriction immediately in the throat around the larynx.
Exactly.
I am so glad that you just said that. And when we see people who are doing a lot of flexion-based abdominal work or things like spinning or soul cycle.
That's right. They start to up in the upper thoracic and the neck starts to move forward and all of these things, the head moving forward, of course, tightens the suboccipital muscles. And then that's hard on the larynx also when you have too much tension in the suboccipital muscles.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So because you want to balance the anterior and posterior neck for the hyoid bone.
Yeah.
So it's really like looking at all this 3D body and the spine going through it and the center, the vertical axis going through it. And you want to keep these cylinders moving and dynamic. And that takes strength.
Mm-hmm. What are a couple things or a couple ways that singers can feel that transversus or the internal obliques, the external obliques, as opposed to the rectus abdominis?
I mean, one important clue is when you contract your abdominals, you don't drop your sternum. You know, your sternum does not curl forward. And your pubic bone also, you don't really want that to curl forward. So you don't want to have a C curve in your spine when you use your abdominals. One cue I give for people is when you contract your abdominals, your head ideally shouldn't move. Your sternum shouldn't move. There may be a little small movements because you are breathing, but you shouldn't have a contraction that pulls your head forward or pulls your sternum down. If you do that, you're using your rectus. So you want to think of the motion of using your abdominals from the bottom up. And you're thinking of, your abdominal viscera, your organs, that you're actually displacing them when you take a breath. So you can displace them and they can go very far forward. You can bulge out. Or you can let them, some movement forward, some movement back. So the abdominals we're talking about, the transversus, the internal obliques, and to some extent the external obliques, really shift and move the abdominal viscera. That's an important part of their job for singers, especially. Mm-hmm. So really the other abdominals don't flex the spine, which we don't want to do.
Yeah. So Lisa, in your work with performers, what are some of the most common biomechanical issues that you see arise?
Probably the most common is head forward. Mm-hmm. So that when you start to be expressive or louder, or that the head moves forward. And that is, counterproductive for singers. So that's the most common.
For so many reasons. Yeah.
For so many reasons, exactly. And that's always a fun thing to work on because you get a lot of bang for your buck when you make those small changes. You feel a lot different when you make that change. When you bring your head back and you don't let your head lead you, then that's a great aha moment for singers and their necks.
Yeah.
And then another thing, there's often rigidity in the rib cage. That's another thing that I often see.
What might be a way to assist with rigidity in the rib cage?
With rigidity in the rib cage, I try to mobilize the upper ribs with some specific movements. One of my favorites is to have the person sit and have about a 9-inch ball under both armpits. And the arms are just hanging, but they're using their feet. You press up from the floor through your feet to connect to the floor. You don't want to just be kind of going with gravity there. You want to use gravity for support. And then you breathe into the right side, the right ball, and you try to move the ball laterally. You don't let your shoulders elevate when you do that. You try to move laterally into the ball, and that ball gives you a little feedback, and you can see it moving. And then you do the same thing on the left, and you see where you get the most movement or the least movement, and then you work on improving that, and your vision helps with that a lot. And then you work on doing both equally. And that tends to start moving the ribs. You do a little bit more costal breathing, so that when you take a breath in, you keep the lower abdominals a bit contracted, and that way the expansion happens more in the ribs. It's not I'm not saying that's a great way to sing, but it's a great way to mobilize the ribs.
Yeah. And so do you do one side and then the other side and then both together, or do you continue to do one side and the other side?
I do one side and the other side and both together. Always come back to both together, because you may want to encourage someone to initiate from a side that's a little slower. So you go both together so that then you can change that pattern of initiation.
Yeah, I'm going to do this, Lisa, with my thoracic surgery and everything.
Yes.
I can't wait to try this. I think
great.
It's going to feel so good.
And just be aware of, your clavicles, your first two ribs staying upwardly rotated. You're not going to let your sternum drop, and your head aligned on your spine. So you use the feet to connect to the pelvis spine up through the head while you're doing this, so that you have the connections between the cylinders of the body, and you are breathing in as much a three-dimensional manner as possible. It's fun. Try it. It feels great.
Yeah, that was something that was super helpful for me when we were working together, is that you explained to me that if the upper body is working, the lower body is supporting it. And if the lower body is working, the upper body is supporting it. So as you just mentioned, that to make sure that you're using your feet, it's so incredibly helpful to think about that, because I was in many yoga class and Pilates class and didn't even have the support of the opposite side, the other extremities, to support whatever.
What's your movement? Exactly. Because you need leverage.
Yeah, so helpful.
We all need leverage to be efficient and to be specific. So, and especially when you have an injury and you still have to do the thing that has caused the injury or is part of the reason for the injury, you have to find a different way to leverage the forces to your advantage.
Yeah.
So that you can continue to do something, but you change the requirements of that action because you have more leverage from your feet. It's very important. Very important.
It is. Yeah, very important. So when we're talking about performers who are performing 8 shows a week, or in an opera where they're doing it a couple times a week, but it's very intense, obviously there are repetitive movement injuries. What might a performer do? What can they do to avoid those repetitive movement injuries?
Right. So, it's so important to have a maintenance program for performers. I always give performers a maintenance program to do before their show. And I give it my best to have it be closest to what they're going to actually be doing, to the actions they're going to do or need, the support they're going to need. That's the program we work on, so that they walk in with a hopefully structural integrity in their spine. And when they do, there's a little less displacement so if I move to the right, I'm moving with a little more structural integrity so that I get support as soon as I come back. So I can move off my center, or I can stay still for, sometimes performers have to be still for 30 minutes on the stage. Mm-hmm. And if you don't stay active, at least in your mind and in your breathing and in being quiet, then all of a sudden getting up and having to move is not going to be easy. So in those quiet moments, I have people do things like the breathing, where they're focusing on pushing through their feet, or they're turning their head a little to side in that moment. Just using these movements, but directing them so that they're supportive and not random. And then if say they have to climb a ladder every night, then how to use the feet pushing up through the glutes, use the hip extensors to support and push up from the bottom instead of pulling up from the arms. And then I would have them do something similar to that, or connecting to their feet and using their feet in their warm-up program.
Yeah.
So that's maintenance programs, even if it's a 10-minute program, is, in my mind, essential to injury prevention.
Yeah, and that maintenance program is set up for each individual person depending on their choreography and what they're doing on the stage, or what injuries or trauma their bodies have already been through, weaknesses that it might already have, or inhibitions it might already have.
Exactly. It's very specific to that. And if you have a conversation, if something's not working, if there's still a problem, then you reevaluate and figure out, okay, when you walk this way, can you make a turn? You try to alter some part of the movement to make it more efficient or change it slightly, because you don't want to end up with an injury. Mm-hmm. So whatever you can do. Sometimes it's your shoes.
Yeah. A lot of times it's your shoes.
Exactly. So you have to really go, okay, these shoes need you need to evaluate these shoes. And then you have to get the designer involved.
Yeah. So what are 3 things that you would want professional voice users to know about movement and their bodies?
3 things. Well, that there are the forces acting on their body. Gravity is the constant force. It's a constant, and it has a direction. So always being aware of using that force, working productively against that force. Always down to go up. So not sort of giving in to gravity. That's a very important movement principle that would make life much easier if I had thought about that sooner. I think that's one of the things that really saves people in terms of effort. And develop a maintenance program for yourself. Become very, very aware of your body, so that when you start to feel something, you can address it quickly, so that it doesn't have to scream at you before you pay attention. That's very important. So develop a familiarity with your body and know what maintenance program works for you. If you need, more stillness, more meditation, but do develop a movement program for yourself, because that's going to be essential your whole life for healthy longevity. Mm-hmm. Well, let's see, learn from the people that you admire, the way they've done it. Look at the way they've accomplished what they've accomplished. Not so much just, that person's a wonderful performer, but how did they get there? What was their practice?
Mm-hmm. Great. So to go over those, Lisa said gravity, her 3 were gravity is a constant force, so always down to go up. Develop a maintenance program and learn from the people that you admire. And that first one, Lisa, always down to go up. So important. When you're getting tired, when I'm in the middle of when I'm towards the end of my day, I have to really get in the head game of, okay, I need to pay attention to gravity here and go down to go up, because when you're tired, it is easy to just start falling out of good body mechanics.
Absolutely.
And just allow your body to start falling over.
Then you just get more tired. Yeah. And it's kind of a simple concept in terms of, okay, I don't need to go through every section of, use my glutes more, use my extensors more, but you can kind of quickly go, push down to go up. And that cues, and that kind of gets you into some muscular synergies and actions that support you right away. So it's a quick cue to get things going. Because if you're going up on your vertical axis, then your spinal muscles are going to engage, and your abdominals can support that. If you also think this kind of upward projection of your abdominals and even your pelvic floor, and I'm really going to be careful here, but even your pelvic floor, if you can sort of down to go up, if you visualize this kind of doming of the pelvic floor, that continuation of doming up through your pelvis and then through your diaphragm and doming up through your neck and your soft palate, and your skull, if you can keep that trajectory, that line, it's very helpful. It's very helpful. That's all I'll say about the pelvic floor.
Another podcast episode. It's a full podcast episode, right?
Talk about controversy.
Yeah, really. So before we move on to my signature questions, you are so incredibly busy, so it's very hard for people to get in with you. So what would you recommend? Would you recommend going to Pilates class or a reformer class, or what would you recommend for movement or for support that, if someone can't get in with you, what can they do?
Well, Pilates classes are great because they're very alignment oriented and they're very conscious movement. So you start talking to your body. You start being very specific about what you're initiating with. So that's a great to develop a core structural integrity. As long as you continue to think of the core is very three-dimensional. There's not this up the front, down the back, no movement otherwise. I really want people to think of the body as three-dimensional, and muscles move in many different directions and perform many different actions all the way around the body. So you don't want to get into a very kind of, I'm on my back, I'm using my abdominals, and it's all frontal. Mm-hmm. So when you're doing things like Pilates and yoga's less that, because you are moving more three-dimensionally and there's more rotation. So as long as you incorporate that into your structural work on Pilates, which is fantastic. I have the Pilates equipment. I love Pilates. But you do have to remember to incorporate some rotational movements and standing movements into your sessions so that you do work against gravity in a very three-dimensional manner. So Pilates is wonderful. Yoga combined with Pilates is wonderful. Things that require balance, things that require you to pay attention to where your center of gravity is, and when you move your head, how that affects the rest of your body. Things that require you to pay attention to that, like yoga, Tai Chi, dance. Dance is fantastic. That's what I do for cardiovascular. I dance. So all forms of dance are great. Some are better than others, and it's really sort of what you need, what you like. Ballet, of course, is a tough thing to jump into. And make sure you get some cardiovascular, be it walking, but vary. I think variation is one of the most important things, is not to just do the same things all the time.
Yeah.
So some Pilates, some long, walks, some dance, some yoga. So kind of balancing what you do and not just doing the same things over and over. Introduce new things to your brain and how your brain works with your body.
Yeah. So you runners and spinners out there, vary it up, because I was once one of you.
Exactly. Your body needs to, and you'll get, it's like a repetitive use injury. And even if you don't get injured, there are things you're missing. Your brain could use some variation.
Yeah, definitely. I am going to move on to my signature questions.
Okay.
So what is some advice that you would like to give to an aspiring young performer?
Persevere, stay optimistic, learn your craft, feel confident in what you're learning, learn from people you admire. Sort of the same things I said before in terms of have your routine that makes you feel strong, you feel centered. Just stay very flexible and open and optimistic.
Great. What is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote, I don't even know who said it. I know a couple of my meditation teachers have said this, and I love it. And it's Blink, and it's a brand new world. Like every time you blink and you open your eyes, cells have turned over. Nothing's ever the same. And that's even at a cellular level. Mm-hmm. So I love that idea of, you never stand in the same river twice. I like that idea of impermanence in that way, where everything, you just can start again.
Yeah.
You have this opportunity always to start anew. So I love that, like blink and it's a whole new world.
I love it too. I haven't ever heard it, but it also is so true and important to think about in a healing process.
Absolutely. We can change. We absolutely can change. When anyone says, "Oh, that's me. I can't change. This is what and I'm like, no, you're making a choice not to change, but you can change because everything can change.
Yeah. Everything is constantly changing, right?
Constantly changing. And I just find that so uplifting and renewing. It's just such an optimistic frame of mind.
Yeah. What are your favorite song lyrics?
Yeah. This is hard because I love so many songs. And of course, my favorite song lyrics are, love songs. Okay, my favorite lyrics that every time I hear them, I just immediately have to either dance around or I just feel good. There's just a warm bath. It's an old, the Rascals. Remember that group? You probably don't because I'm dating myself, but they had this song and the first lyrics were, "It's a beautiful morning. I think I'll go outside a while and just smile." Mm-hmm. And it's just this great tune, and the whole song is like that. So every time I hear it, I just cheer up or
smile,
start moving around and smile. It's just and the tune is really great too. The music is great. So that's my corny feel good lyrics that I love.
Yeah. Who influenced your teaching the most?
Definitely Dr. Ann Gentile up at Teachers College, Columbia. She's unfortunately passed away, but she was just huge in my entire approach to teaching. And also Irene Dowd, who was also a huge influence on me when I started studying with her in the 80s. She is the kinesthetic anatomy teacher at Juilliard, and she also does a lot of classes in her studio, and especially in the 80s. And so I started studying kinesthetic anatomy with her in her studio, and she does a lot of movement analysis, and she's just brilliant. And watching her teach and learning from her was really an enormous influence in my life. And she's still a great friend.
What is something new about the voice or the body that you learned this week?
I'm always surprised at body's response to breathing and how a tightness under the shoulder blade can be relieved with kind of directed use of the diaphragm. I'm always searching for those kinds of interesting moments where you initiate movement from one vertebra and it changes your alignment in your foot. Mm-hmm. So these kinds of things are always so interesting. Just rotating one vertebra in your thoracic can change how your hip feels. That happened this week. That was, a wonderful moment. I guess those kinds of things.
Those are great. What is one item you could never live without?
Oh, I don't think I could live without. I study meditation online, and I use this app called Waking Up with Sam Harris. And he is a neuroscientist, philosopher, just wonderful teacher. And so I use his meditation app, and it really helps. It really helps me. So I would not want to have to be without that, especially on tough days.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out. What is one thing that you have on your bucket list?
To be fluent in Spanish.
Do you already study Spanish?
I do. And my husband and my daughter are both fluent. My husband's Mexican, and they're both fluent. And that's my bucket list.
Mm. What is your favorite book?
My favorite fiction book, I just read a great book called Tell Me How It Ends. It's an essay and 40 questions by Valeria Luiselli, and it was based on her work asking children seeking asylum, immigrant children seeking asylum. You have to go through this 40 question thing when they try to come into the country. And she wrote these beautiful essays. Each one was like its own separate story based on these questions. And it taught me so much, and it was also just a beautiful book. So I loved that book.
What are you currently learning?
I'm currently learning Spanish and meditation. Been studying meditation for about 5 years now. So those are things I'm currently actively learning.
Great. What do you wish you would have learned sooner?
Spanish and meditation.
Great. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me and talking to us about movement, kinesiology. It has been just awesome spending this hour talking with you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's been fun. I hope it's helpful.
Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with those you know. You can also subscribe, rate, and write a review. If you want to connect with me, you can now find me on Instagram under The Visceral Voice. You can find me on Facebook under my name or under Life Light Massage, or you can check out my website at lifelightmassage.com. Please join me in 2 weeks for another wonderful conversation on The Visceral Voice.